today we're continuing on with the Volvo 850 PCV replacement. First thing I do here is just tighten up some of the bolts on the new PCV valve that we put in, and then we're going to start putting on the clamps and the new pipes. I'm going to put a bottom clamp on this, and the top one doesn't really matter. I'm just going to put it up there. Put the bottom one, this comes off the back. What I did was I left this on the old one so I could tell where it was supposed to go, but your final adjustment for this one needs to be made when you put the intake on, so leave this end off. So that's generally speaking where it needs to be. I'll use this clamp. Don't over tighten this, it's plastic. You could definitely break it. So now we need to figure out where this one goes. Like I said, mine doesn't have this vacuum line that's on this one. So I'm not sure why this exists here. Is this, maybe this is the vacuum line that's on the intake? I never did figure out where that vacuum line was supposed to go. My car doesn't seem to have that one. I did have one vacuum line in the back that had no location for it to go, so I just capped it off. So far, no issues, but I figured it was better capped off than wide open. So this just connects down here. Let me get a picture of that. So this other line that comes from here, PCV, connects right back to your intake down here. Let's see if we can get that. It's that hose right here. So you gotta undo that. The wrench to take this off is 8mm, and just be aware that could be different on your car if your clamps are replaced at some point. But I took that off, and then you'll see I pull the actual tube right out, and that's about it. Just take note of where the tube goes through, because you have to put the new one through that same location, otherwise you'll have some issues. I first put it through the wrong one and then realized that it just wasn't long enough, so I moved it down and put it through the correct one. Here what I'm doing is I'm feeding through the new the tube from the PCV to the back part of the intake, and just make sure you get it routed correctly. That's the biggest thing here, otherwise you won't be able to get it to attach right. After this, off camera, I cleaned the intake. It was really pretty disgusting, but I took a lot of time, degreaser, brake cleaner, cleaned it out as best as I could, and then we're going to start shortly putting the intake back on. Make sure that you do a good cleaning on the intake surfaces. I'm just using a razor blade here to do a quick scrape on this. I already cleaned it up pretty good, but just wipe everything down, make sure it's perfectly clean on both sides, otherwise you won't get a good seal on the intake and the car's not going to run right. So here's the new gasket. What you have to do is put the bottom bolts in and make sure they're in just enough to hold on the intake. This one's thread feels a little gross. I'm just gonna set something like this, maybe a hair less. What happens is the intake just hangs on these bolts until you get it all together. So I'm going to call that good. And you got to feed this through as you put the intake in, but I need to address this guy before I go too crazy, so I'm thinking I don't know if I'll be able to put that on I think I'm going to put that on while everything's still kind of out. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little sealant on this. I'm going to undo this from here so it's free so I can do what I need to do. I'll probably install it like that on the side. I don't know if you can see that, but I don't know if this is supposed to have sealant, but I'm not changing the gasket. I figure it's not that important because it's something to do with the EGR. This car's so old, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a thin layer on this. Try not to get it in anything, just around the edges. And like I said, this is just to make sure that this seals all right. I clean the entire intake. It's not perfect, but it'll work. The gasket actually isn't in horrible shape that was on here. It's just not, it's not in the best shape. Alright, so there's nothing in the actual hole there. I'm sure somebody will yell at me and say you're not supposed to do this, but I'm only doing it on here. I'm not doing it anywhere else. And it's only because this is an old gasket, and like I said, I don't have a new one. So let's see if I can position this. I need something like this. Get this guy out of the way. Get this a little bit light. This may work. We're going to find out. Just make sure you line up the gasket properly. Put in the 2 bolts. I believe they were 10 millimeters. They're the weird looking ones with the long ends on them. And then when you put this actually back down to line it up, make sure you line up. There's a metal tube that comes into that little vacuum box. Like I said, I think it's for the EGR. I'm not 100% sure. So once you line that up, you can then screw that back on after the fact. Now I'm going to finagle this to where I can get this through and correctly position the intake. I probably should have done the thermostat while I was doing all this other stuff, but I'm going to do it after I get everything back together. I'm going to pop this on here. Loosen this first. Make sure it's down all the way. And then tighten it up. Alright, that feels good. That looks fine. Alright, so now we can put in the rest of the intake bolts. So what I'm doing here is I'm just installing all the intake bolts. Just remember the one that's all the way over on the driver's side has a little clip to hold the PCV tubes out of the way of everything else. Then after this I went underneath and tried to line up the dipstick and the actual mount that holds the intake. It just wasn't happening. So what I do after I'm done with everything is I go back through and do this when the car's in the air. It was just so much easier in the air. Alright, well, I can't get that bolt in right now. I need more room to work under the car, so what I'm going to do is I am going to pop these off and replace the O-rings and wipe them down. You don't want to damage the O-ring, but you need it to go in straight. Looking alright now. I need to get new gloves. These ones fall. I think I'm going to be replacing these injectors at some point. Some nice new ones, which I'll get way more power. But I haven't decided if I get this thing tuned at some point, then I'm gonna need bigger injectors. So it's like, do I wait? So basically you should have something like a dental pick to remove the seals from the injectors. I don't have one handy, so I was just using a flathead screwdriver, so just be careful. I also wiped them all down, cleaned them up. They were in really, I would say 4 out of 5 were in really good shape. One of them just looked like crap, but they seem to run fine for now, so I'm not going to change them out. It's like a 10-minute job if you really want to change out your injectors. So just clean them up, put the new seals on, and then go from there, and then pop everything back in. The injectors seals on, there's another set of seals that go into the actual intake. You'll see me pop them in real quick, and then after that you basically just pop the injectors in, and then you have to push in the new fuel line and reattach the return line. Once you get those in, that's about it. It's a little harder to get the main fuel line in. Just take your time, put the little bracket on, and screw it in. It'll go in. Like I said, it's hard to get it. So all I'm doing now is just putting back everything that was here to begin with. Any pipes, connectors, power connector here, one down below. And put this back. This is the throttle cable. So what you do is wrap it around. Yeah, looks good. Then I need to think, am I forgetting anything here? Vacuum line here, which I think goes right to this. And yep, it does. I just have to. And yeah, this one goes here. Then we got. So that's about it. Just double check your vacuum lines. The diagram is right there on the screen for you right now. And like I said, I had one vacuum line that I could never figure out where it went, so I still got some looking around to do. But from here, you know, you just have to button up everything else that you took off. In my case, I had the air box and everything off, so I had to put all that back together. And don't forget to reattach your dipstick and the mount that's on the bottom of the intake. Like I said, easier to do if the car's in the air, but I was doing a bunch of other things after this. I was changing the oil, doing the transmission fluid, and a few other things, so I just did it all at once. And yeah, that's the end. If you liked the video, like it, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.